For those of you I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Alan Taylor. I run global programs for a group called Endeavor that works across Latin America and in emerging markets around the world supporting high-impact entrepreneurs. But my role here today is going to be as your kind of guide and moderator for a panel really focused on what's happening here in New York in terms of the early stage investment and kind of the entrepreneur and tech ecosystem. So I am aware of the fact that I think we are the last thing standing between you and your lunch. So we'll try to keep this fun and lively. And we'll try to leave a couple minutes at the end for questions. But before we jump in, I want to give each of the panelists just kind of 1 minute. Go ahead and introduce yourselves. Tell us a little about your day job, what you guys do. We have a very distinguished panel of investors kind of from different parts of the ecosystem here. And maybe share with the group kind of your relationship to New York. How long have you lived here? How long you've been here, et cetera?
Sure. My name's Nate Westheimer. By day, I co-founded and help run and do the back-end development for a startup called Picture Life. We are your backup solution in the cloud for all of your photos. So if you have a Mac, I see a few Macs. If you have an iPad or an iPhone, you can go download Picture Life right now. So that's my day job, is to build that and to sell that. And my evening job, I guess, one of them is to be an advisor to Flybridge Capital Partners, which is a Boston-based VC firm, starting a small seed fund with my family focused here in New York. But mainly it's the New York Tech Meetup, which is a 28,000-member organization here in New York City. I'm the executive director of that and have been doing that since 2008, 4 years ago. And I've lived in New York since 2005, so I spent the first couple years here really getting to know what was going on and seeing the foundations, getting to know people like David, seeing the foundations of what this tech community has become.
Great, thanks. Jeremy?
I'm Jeremy Levine. I work at Bessemer Venture Partners. I've been at Bessemer since 2001, and I've lived in New York since 1995, with the exception of an 18-month stint elsewhere. That didn't last long and wasn't that enjoyable. I love New York. That said, most of my investing is not in New York. I've invested everywhere from Russia to California and a lot of places in between. And I've done maybe about half of my investing is consumer internet, and half is more software, enterprise software. And I was involved early on with companies like Yelp and LinkedIn and Fabrice's company, OLX. More recently, companies like Pinterest, Parallels in Russia, or Top Free Games down in Brazil.
Good. Thank you for having me here. It's great to be here, everyone. Dave Lerner. I am from Brooklyn. I grew up here, made in New York, born and raised. It's been amazing to see the development of this ecosystem over the last, decade, I would say. Coming back to New York in '01, there were no blogs. Really, there was no strong community here. And then I would say in the last 10 years, we've seen an amazing entrepreneurial community blossom here in New York, especially in the last 3 or 4 years. We can get to it. Basically, I teach entrepreneurship at the business school at Columbia. My day job is I run the venture lab at Columbia Tech Ventures, where we spin out 10 to 15 companies a year based on faculty inventions. Personally, I'm an angel investor, and I created something called the Startup Genome, which is mapping entrepreneurial ecosystems worldwide with a human layer of curation on top of it. And it's great to be here.
Awesome. So Dave, maybe we'll start with you as the native New Yorker. I think where we'd like to start this conversation is, to share with the panel, obviously there's something happening here in New York, right? For Ready Nova, which is a Madrid-based kind of thing to be having an event here. There's a reason you guys are all here. There's a reason we're here. What are one or two of the most important things that have happened in this ecosystem in the last year or two, in your view?
Yeah. First, I'll say that actually my mom is from Barcelona. I'm just sharing that with you guys. So I feel comfortable being at this gathering with you.
We'll be doing that next. Where is everyone's mother from? That'll be the next question.
Yeah, but, I think the most powerful thing about New York City, the tech scene here, is the strength of our community. And I'm not saying it's unique. I'm just saying that on any given night of the week, you can go to, or day, or lunch, or breakfast, frankly. You can go to great events throughout the city. If you're interested in fashion, if you're interested in fintech, if you're interested in ad tech, writing, books, whatever, there's going to be an event happening in New York one of the days in the week. And every Monday you can get Gary's Guide or some of the other emails that tell you every event going on. And you can dive into the tech community. It's a very warm and welcoming community, and I think it's very special. So that's, to me, something that has really blossomed, I would say, in the last 3 or 4 years. It's sort of come together. There were a lot of early pioneers that helped build it, and then guys like Nate and many others came in and just brought it to the next level.
So I think we hear a lot about kind of the community and the ecosystem, and certainly you could fill your whole life up with events happening in New York. Jeremy, from your perspective, kind of as Bessemer, as a global investment firm, what are you guys excited about? Maybe not even you personally, but kind of with your partners, about maybe sectors or things, kind of opportunities you see in New York today?
I mean, New York has some advantages, certainly, and I think that's part of what sparked this sort of renaissance of the tech ecosystem. One is it's very close to a few industries that are far away from, say, Silicon Valley, where most of the tech industry, in the U.S. at least, emanates from. One industry is the advertising industry. It's dominated by Madison Avenue. It's here. Another is the financial industry. Wall Street is here. And then the third one is the sort of fashion and sort of art scene is much more New York-centric than other places. That said, while those are advantages, the truth is the number of really interesting tech companies or startups that have emerged in any of those industries is really small. The really big tech companies tend not to be in those industries. And so while it's an advantage, I actually feel at the same time the attraction to being close to those industries often leads startups astray, in that they get sort of sucked into what might be close by, where the expertise and the knowledge is local, but that may not be the best sector to be trying to build a big business.
Nate, I want to talk a little bit about New York Tech Meetup, because I do think that's an important piece of the puzzle here. Can you share with the audience, I guess, a little bit of the history, going back to 2008, right? Or
it was founded in 2004.
Or 2004, okay. But then particularly kind of, with this huge community today, what are the opportunities for this? Like, what do you guys want to do with this as a platform?
Yeah, sure. So the history is that it was founded in 2004, and to speak to a little bit about what both Jeremy and David spoke to before, it was founded by Scott Heiferman, who had done startups in the 90s, and then post-2001 started a company called Meetup.com. And Meetup.com at first, they would tell you which meetups you could go to. You'd go to their site, and it would just list. You could go to the Howard Dean meetup, and it was down the street at the bar. And Meetup dictated that. And then when they turned it on its head and they said, no, people can create their own meetups, the CEO of the company, doing what a good CEO does, ate the dog food and created a meetup. And so he decided to call it the New York Tech Meetup. And what he did is he invited a handful of his friends, and to the first one person came. And to the next one, 5 people came. And to one, maybe 3 afterwards, Josh Schachter came and said, hey, I'm working on this cool thing. It's called Delicious, and check it out. I just finished it. And what he started was this culture of celebrating people just making things. And I think we have a lot of events here in New York, but what I think has been special about New York is that it's not just about the number of events and the amount of capital, but it's been about this culture of celebrating. And this speaks to what attracted me to the New York Tech Meetup. When I joined in 2007, and there were 3,000 members, and what's helped us grow to 28,000 members is a culture of celebrating making stuff. It doesn't have to be commercial. It has to be innovative. It has to be interesting. But that's what we want to see. We want to celebrate each other and celebrate the really interesting things that we're working on, whether it needs to turn into a startup or not. So that's what attracted me to the organization, and that's what I think has really been a big success in why New York has grown. And those are the areas in which I think New York is most successful in terms of producing things of value, people making things that their friends are going to love. New York's a great city to have friends in because you can constantly see them. So we've stuck to that culture. We've stuck to that very same culture when there were 5 people in the room. Now that we sell out in about 15 minutes, 860 people every month. and have this membership of 28,000. And what we've tried to do is stick by that culture. And then now, as you mentioned, what do? We try to take that number and we try to leverage it in areas in which we think we can uniquely solve a problem. So, for instance, response to Hurricane Sandy here in New York City, we have a unique position in which we can reach out to 28,000 technologists, and no one else can do that. And so we said, we'll organize them. Our managing director, Jessica Lawrence, has been working tirelessly after this tragedy to help coordinate the technology ecosystem's response to this tragedy by getting technologists, startups, people with office space donating office space to other people, people hacking on new maps. And this is something that uniquely this organization can do. For instance, with the SOPA PIPA stuff back in January, we felt we could uniquely get people onto the streets, and we got 3,000 people, technologists, protesting outside the senator's offices on that legislation. So we'll continue to do things that we think uniquely our organization can do, and then stay out of stuff that other people should do.
So it sounds like, you know, there is a lot happening in the ecosystem in terms of activity, in terms of people being excited, people getting sort of, to Fabrice's point earlier, kind of early stage, seed stage funding in companies. Question for the panel, for each of you guys: what do you think is still missing in New York in terms of actually being able to build billion-dollar companies out of here, or at least, you know, dozens of companies with sort of bigger, call them several $100 million exits? What's New York missing for that to be able to happen? Maybe Jeremy, if you want to start.
Sure. I think the main missing ingredient is success. And so the Silicon Valley is so powerful because there are so many great successful companies, and those great successful companies birth a population of fabulously wealthy entrepreneurs who then give back to the community. But even more importantly, what I sort of call the next level down. And so folks who were relatively young when they joined the company inherited at a young age enormous amounts of responsibility in a business that grew really quickly, and made a little bit of money, you know, not tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, but maybe hundreds of thousands or a small number of millions of dollars, which afforded them then also still early in their career to take even more significant risks, because they're no longer worried about where the $50 or $100 or $200,000 paycheck is going to come from next year. And then, I guess most importantly, all of those people who were part of something really successful have all this knowledge. And so when you're building a business and you need certain kind of talent, certain kind of expertise, there's so many people from whom you can choose. And in New York, the truth is that there have been some great successes. Probably the most prominent one in the true tech ecosystem is DoubleClick. Probably the biggest success is Bloomberg, although that's from 2 generations before. And so there is a population of folks who've been there and done that, but it's tiny. I mean, I could list on, you know, all of my fingers and toes equivalently large and successful companies based on the West Coast. And I think that will come in New York, but it may take a generation or two of entrepreneurs. It may be a 10 or 20-year time horizon before the talent available here starts to match what you can find on the West Coast. And that's when I think New York becomes really competitive. Until then, it's an upstarts market.
I think there's something that New York is lacking, and to me, it's that there's not a great exit opportunity for startups to stay in New York City. So if you are going to either be acqui-hired or even sold at a good price, you are most likely going to be shipped out west. And if you do stay here, I still believe that the intellectual capital that you are creating ends up getting exported as well. So even if you get to keep your team here, that company has an incentive to make sure the best and brightest ideas end up living somewhere else. And so, you know, this is a great I mean, what's happening in New York is incredible, but it's still fragile. It was more fragile a couple years ago. And, you know, we saw somebody like Sam Lessin, who was an entrepreneur here, who was very involved in building up this momentum here. The company got acqui-hired to Facebook. He leaves town. Justin Schaefer, who ran MLB's technology outfit, Major League Baseball's, and then started a company called Hot Potato, again, got acqui-hired, left town. We need to fix this, and I don't know if it is AOL or IAC deciding to be technology companies instead of media companies, or if it's one of our own growing up. Foursquare one day, somebody else growing up and becoming a big enough enterprise that they can start to compete and acquire companies at all stages.
Yeah, I think both of you guys are making very valid points, but I don't look at it as from a perspective of what are we missing. I think we're in the stage where we're still developing, and we're a couple of generations behind the likes of a Silicon Valley in terms of that entrepreneurial recycling of entrepreneurs and mentors and angel investors and exits and big companies. But we'll get there. I think, if anything, just like every other entrepreneurial ecosystem, we need tech talent, right? And the culture is developing. I see it on a daily basis in the university atmosphere. We have what I call a tidal wave of entrepreneurship, interest in entrepreneurship sweeping the country throughout universities. A lot more people are getting into computer science, learning how to code, but it's still not where it should be or it will get to. In New York, we're lucky. We also have the likes of a Cornell coming to New York City and totally investing in tech on Roosevelt Island. That's going to lead to an influx of engineers coming into our companies. But the culture still has a ways to go. But I see it taking hold. I see in the course I teach at Columbia, launching new ventures. There's 70 students in my section. There's also, Columbia had to open up yet another section of launching new ventures this year for the first time. So there are another 70 students trying to launch new ventures in yet another section. And this is the same at NYU, it's the same at Cornell. But it's developing and the culture is taking hold. So that's what I'd share.
I guess coming back to that idea of success, or Endeavor actually talks about this a lot as role models, right? And so for us, working with entrepreneurs in emerging markets, guys like Marcos Galperin and Hernan Gaza, who started Mercado Libre, which was an Endeavor-backed company a dozen years ago in Argentina that ended up having a global success story, also became a big part of kind of a nascent, burgeoning ecosystem of tech entrepreneurship now in a place like Buenos Aires. I think if you take, Kevin and DoubleClick, that's one example here for New York. Kind of thinking to the future, and I'll give each of you guys a chance to answer this one. I'm curious. If you had to bet, sort of from a probability perspective, out of 100, what's the chance that the next really big success company comes out of a place like New York versus one of the emerging markets around the world versus they're just going to keep coming from Silicon Valley? What do you think?
If I had to bet, that's easy. It's likely to come from Silicon Valley. I mean, there's just very few exceptions of truly global tech companies coming from anywhere else. It will happen. I mean, Skype is a decent example, and so it will happen, but it's quite unlikely. I think within emerging economies, I think we're more likely to see local or regional behemoths like Mercado Libre as opposed to truly global companies. And so, I think for the odds to change, a lot of time has to pass. I think it's a decades kind of a time horizon, not a years or a months kind of thing.
Okay. Dave, agree or disagree?
I kind of agree with him. I don't know. I think decades is decades plural is strong. Maybe a decade, but Jeremy's he's investing all over the world, so he has that global perspective. But you know what? My point of view is a lot of good companies are being built here, and we're at that stage in our life cycle, and that's okay. We got some awesome companies that I'm seeing emerging. Emerging out of New York City, emerging from the universities. I think Pinterest came out of NYU, if I'm not mistaken, right? The early sort of.
We're actually based in California, and they couldn't get anyone interested, so they came here and entered a business plan competition.
Okay, so they found something valuable.
New York can claim it, kind of.
Okay, but I remember Joe Fernandez from Klout, Klout. He was here in New York. I remember him at the New York Tech Meetup about 3-4 years ago. A guy who literally had his jaw wired shut, had to get some surgery, and was just immersing himself in the internet and came up with this idea for measuring people's impact online, their social impact, and started this company called Clout. And I remember him getting up on stage at New York Tech Meetup when we were hosting him at IAC about 3 or 4 years ago, before we had 28,000 members, and being inspired by this guy and saying, wow, this is a huge idea. I became an investor. They're doing great things, but at some point, you know, he decided I need to move to Silicon Valley to really grow this thing, right? So it's going to take time for us to be a harbor and a harnesser of the middle to late stage of companies like that. It's just going to take time, so I kind of agree.
I'll let you chime in a second, but I'll make one other point, because the cloud example reminded me of it, and that is, you know, in general, if you want to, this is my opinion, if you want to maximize the chance of succeeding with a tech startup, there's only one place in the world to do it, and that's Silicon Valley, because it has more advantages than disadvantages relative to any other geography. But hopefully, nobody thinks that way, because life isn't just about maximizing the chance of a startup or a company of succeeding. And I personally am an investor in tech companies, and yet I live in New York, because New York, in my opinion, is the best place in the world to live. It's not for everybody, but it's for me. I love New York. And so I will compensate, and the happiness and enjoyment I get out of my life from living in New York allows me to have more energy, more enthusiasm, work harder, and I think offsets to a great degree the fact that I have this big disadvantage in that I live in New York, not in Silicon Valley. And I've still invested in lots of companies, lots of great companies that are in Silicon Valley. And so I think for anyone, whether you want to be an investor in the tech ecosystem, an advisor, an entrepreneur, an employee at a company, you have to decide where you want to live. And then you play in the constraints of that geography. And that if you are willing to put your life aside and just do what's best for your company or your career, I think it's pretty easy. You go to Silicon Valley. But my hope, and I think the reason why it will take time, is that some folks who decide to buck the trend will build a company in New York or in Sao Paulo or in Buenos Aires, and they'll be wildly successful there, despite the fact that they're taking on the extra disadvantage of not being in what I call Mecca, which is Silicon Valley.
Yeah, see, I don't know if this microphone is working, but, you know, the specter of Silicon Valley, of course, you know, hovers over any entrepreneur ecosystem in the world. But that's true in any industry, right? The people who've been the most successful, okay, you know, everyone's looking at them, et cetera. But that's not what I do personally. I mean, it's sort of riffing on what you're just saying. If you're an entrepreneur and you're living in your town and you're going to start a company, embrace your local ecosystem and make the best of it. You should see what's going on in Brooklyn, for example. We've got companies like MakerBot and people building stuff, 3D printing. The community in there is special. It's unique. The lifestyle, people are biking to work. There's a whole community in neighborhoods that I probably would have been killed in if I had gone when I was a kid. I mean, these neighborhoods are flourishing. They're on the waterfront. No one used to go in there, and there's just a whole new crop of young entrepreneurs that are not only building tech companies and 3D printing companies and companies like Etsy and others, but it's a lifestyle and it's a community that they've bought into, and they're very happy. And so be it, man. This is how it's going, and it's wonderful. And that's true for all of the ecosystem you guys are in. I'm not one to compare ecosystems. You know, each one is special in its own way. And my attitude is, how do we coordinate? How do we communicate with each other? How do we make ties, right? How do we help each other out? That's my perspective. So, you know, and that's kind of why, you know, that was my inspiration for doing the Startup Genome Project, was just like map the ecosystems, make it very accessible and transparent, and let people find out what's going on elsewhere very quickly without searching through a lot of sites, right? Yep. Who went to my university that's in the tech scene in this city that I can go get in touch with, who's in robotics, who's in 3D printing, etc.
So 3D printing has replaced getting shot in the street in Brooklyn, which is good to hear.
Ironic, because you can actually print a gun.
You can print a gun with a 3D printer, yeah. Well, so that's where I was going.
Sorry.
Well done. No, team joke telling. That's good on any panel. We'll see if we can do it again. Actually, I want to go to the Startup Genome just for 1 second, Dave, because I think it is a tremendous resource now, right? So maybe if you do a 10-second commercial for the audience on what it is, but also, what have you guys found are the most important elements that kind of stand out, right? Because this idea of everywhere around the world, from Buenos Aires to Sao Paulo to Mexico City to Tucumán, right? They want to recreate Silicon Valley, which I think doesn't really work, right? But what you can do is sort of suss out what are the important aspects or elements that people can start working on locally in their local community, if that makes sense.
Sure. Very quickly, startupgenome.com. Twitter is @startupgenome. Basically, we created this to be the most relevant database in the world for information on entrepreneurial ecosystems. So, if you're an entrepreneur or you're a student or anyone in the world who's interested in an entrepreneurial ecosystem, instead of going to 50 different sites to find out who are the VCs, angels, entrepreneurs, founders, accelerators, incubators, just go to the city. It's all mapped out, both hyperlinked lists and visualizations, which we're really going to blow out and make beautiful. And we've opened up the API. You can embed maps on your blogs, wherever you want to do. And we've sucked in all this data, but we have a human layer of curation on top of it. So we've sort of harnessed the power of folks, and we all know people like this. Many of you are these types of people who take pride in your ecosystem, right? And you know what the latest event has been, that this person is no longer at that startup and they moved there. So when you have people curating it to make it relevant, accurate, etc., it's a huge advantage. Also, we're going to map university ecosystems. We're going to map ecosystems by industry. So it's not just consumer internet companies, right? It's the long tail of entrepreneurship, right? People building stuff, robotics, healthcare, biotech, medical devices, 3D printing. You should be able to search an ecosystem quickly and identify what you're looking for. And that's it. We're just opening it up to everyone to use it. And we did just partner with Endeavor yesterday. Yeah. So thanks.
Good stuff. You can clap, I guess, if you want. I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll open up to the audience. So, be thinking of your questions for this panel. But mine actually sort of is about connecting New York, particularly to Latin America, right? So I live out in San Francisco now. I spend my time in Silicon Valley. To some degree, Silicon Valley has struggled a little bit to connect with Brazil and the rest of Latin America, right? We don't have direct flights. People grumble all the time about how, we're not really plugged in. New York, given kind of the cultural affinities, the cultural connections, the direct flights, I'll emphasize that as being a significant part. Does New York have an opportunity to be sort of a global tech hub for Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, kind of Latin America? What do you guys think?
Well, I can tell you that it already is. And not just, Europe. 5 hours flight rather than something that takes you all day. The startup I did before this was based in Jerusalem, and so that was a long flight, but it's a lot longer to get to Silicon Valley. So it's already the hub, and it will be. And it's because of these geographic and issues, and because of the direct flights. But I also think it's something that's cultural. I think you think New York City is the best city in the world. As it turns out, if you don't live in the United States, you probably also think that New York City is the best city in the United States. You certainly don't think that suburban wasteland south of San Francisco is the best area in New York in the United States.
Tell us how you really feel.
Well, I think that we talk about the culture of New York, and New York is New York. People live there for the tech ecosystem. Very few people live in that particular area, unless you live, on the coast or in the mountains or something like that, because of the what it has to offer other than being a short commute to Yahoo. So we have that, and that's what when we don't have those other things that they have, but we have New York, and that's what the rest of the world sees. So it's a great place, but we're already there. We're already the people who I had a friend from Israel who got back by Sequoia. Sequoia begged him to come out west. He said, "No, I'm going to be in New York. It's a better place to be, and it's closer to Israel." And that I hear that story all the time.
Well said.
Okay. So questions, I guess, from the audience, and we are sort of blinded by lights, so if you could help us, if there's any hands out there. Over here, yeah.
My question's directed at Jeremy. I'm good without it. I mangled microphones. And it kind of gets down to how or what's it like to be in more of an institutional or family office setting versus kind of being somebody who's a more traditional angel or early stage investor?
I mean, there are many dimensions to that question. I think the short answer is it just depends wildly on which setting you're in. We almost think of ourselves at Bessemer more as a group of individual investors, and I think that's important, particularly if you do early stage investing, because if you have there are 15 partners at Bessemer, and if we had to get all 15 to agree that something was a good idea, we would never do anything innovative, because in general, the innovative stuff seems crazy. You know, my two favorite examples are Skype, where we led the Series A, and when one of my partners met Janos Nicholas in London, he had to sign a document that said he promised under contract that he would never disclose the location at which he'd met them, because they were both essentially hiding from the record industry. They were being sued and couldn't step foot in the U.S. They were essentially fugitives. And if everyone had to agree that backing these two fugitives was a good idea, we never would have done it. And similarly with LifeLock, another one of our companies that just went public within the last couple of months, one of the founders there had been essentially sued by, I think it was the FTC, and barred from a certain industry for some deceptive advertising practices in his youth. And it's the same thing, was this guy sketchy or not? And if all 15 people have to dig in and get comfortable, then you just never make a decision to do something that's sort of bold or different. And so I think, and our institution has existed for about 100 years and has lived through many different groups of partners. And I think part of why it's worked is because it allows individuals to go out on a limb. And if it works, you're rewarded, and if it doesn't, you're fired. And so I joke every year we have a bit of if you've seen the TV show Survivor, where we all get together and one person leaves the room and we talk about him or her, and he comes back and the next person leaves the room. And I've been there for 11 years, and almost every year someone's voted off the island. And so if you don't have a really open, really transparent, really data-driven culture where you're allowed to take risks and you're rewarded or penalized when they work or don't, you end up with mediocrity. You never do anything innovative. You never do anything gutsy. So I don't know if that's helpful or what you were looking for.
My contact or former contact at Bessemer, uber conservative. So I'm like, what's he doing?
There are many Bessemers. There's Bessemer Trust, which is a private wealth management group that it's a private bank that sort of competes with a J.P. Morgan private bank or Goldman Sachs. That's owned by a family that provides us with a lot of our capital. And so we have a common name, but totally different organizations.
Other questions out there? Okay. Oh, wait, one more? Sorry. Lisandro, yes.
Yes. When venture capital was invested, the question is for Dave Lerner. When venture capital was invented, internet didn't exist, so not everything is about internet. And you are something like director of venture labs at Columbia Technology Ventures. Could you comment on this? Because the role of Stanford in developing innovation entrepreneurship has been big. MIT as well. So what's the role of Columbia?
Well, people are often shocked, and I'm not going to start bragging about our track record, but commercializing the intellectual property of universities is a field that started in about 1980 because of something called the Bayh-Dole Act that gave universities ownership of all the IP on campus, and it was probably one of the most seminal pieces of legislation in terms of the billions of dollars that is generated since that time. So it's about 30 years old. Google spun out of Stanford, and Gatorade spun out of the University of Florida, etc. So they started as licensing operations, but probably in the last 10 to 15 years, it's become more common to spin companies out of universities. So this, too, has been a cultural change that has been transformative. So Columbia's done extremely well. It's always been sort of a leader in the field. If you have a medical school, it certainly helps because it's a home run hitting business. If you have a molecule that becomes a drug and you have a 1% royalty on it, you can imagine the kind of revenues that come back to the university. And they don't go in anyone's pocket necessarily. They certainly go to the inventor's pocket, but they go back into the labs, they go back into the schools, etc. So this is a field that I know is starting to take hold in South American countries, in Europe, etc. And you realize, to your point, that consumer internet is, a frothy, great field to be in. But there's great companies in biotech and robotics, etc. And I deal a lot with companies like that, and great investors, populate that whole industry. So it's wonderful for someone like me to see these two different worlds, right? And how valuable they are. And that informed a lot what I did with the Startup Genome and stuff, because I know there's a huge number of entrepreneurs out there that are not working on purely internet startups.
Great. Well, it is a fantastic topic, and we could keep going for a while, but I think we are out of time. So I just want to thank Pablo for inviting us, and to thank Dave, Jeremy, and Nate for being here. Please join me in giving him a round of applause.
Thank you. Yeah.